So every week leading up to the next week of fantasy football, I do top 12 defense rankings for the particular week in fantasy football. And this week, it just didn't feel like enough. I got a lot of questions about, what about this defense? What about this defense this week? There's a lot of bye weeks and obviously a lot of injuries to the defensive side of the ball. I feel like I need to do a start-sit video for this week's fantasy football defense options. And every Saturday, I go through every matchup to find the must-start and sit wide receivers and running backs. So this week, I'm doing it for the defense right here. We're going through every matchup to find who's a startable defense and who's just a defense you need to stay away from. I'm doing this video because I want to help my audience make the best decisions possible for this week. And I'm one of the only fantasy football YouTubers who covers defense on a weekly basis. So please go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Let's go ahead and dive through these matchups right now. So the first matchup is on Sunday morning at 8:30 a.m. Central Time. It is an overseas game, Dolphins versus the Chiefs. So by the way, make sure your lineup is set on Saturday night because you will likely not be awake by the time this game starts. I don't think either of these defenses you need to start right now. This is a tier where I think that both of these offenses are going to be putting up points. I think the Chiefs offense is going to rebound after an embarrassing loss to the Broncos. Mahomes is not sick anymore. He's going to be fine. He was sick last week. That was the ultimate problem here. The Dolphins defense, first of all, they're not talented enough for me to put them as a start most of the time, especially not against the Chiefs offense that's coming off a really bad week, and they're going to be ready to go. So you'll see in this tier, I have in a pinch in this middle tier right here. I do think you can play the Chiefs defense in a pinch, and the only reason why is because for two reasons. When you look at the teams that Miami have played, every team they've beaten has been horrendous. They can't beat anybody who's great. And you know that because both teams that they've played that are considered great teams with a record above 500, a la the Buffalo Bills, a la the Philadelphia Eagles, they lost. And they got actually pretty handled offensively. They got bullied and beaten around. So the other reason why is because the Chiefs defense has been very good in fantasy football this year. They're a top 10 defense in fantasy this year. So in a pinch, you can do this. I just think that this will inevitably be a high-scoring game because the Chiefs have not been playing their best football, and Miami is, of course, just super explosive offensively. The next matchup on the list is the Vikings at the Falcons this week. And on the top 12 defense ranking video this week, I said Vikings are in the top 12. They were inside my top 10, actually, as far as defense options for this particular week. I think the Vikings defense is a very solid play. First of all, their defense this year has been so much better than we originally anticipated heading into the season. Based on their talent preseason, I really didn't think they'd be worth much of anything. I thought it would be a very similar situation to what it was last year. Well, they made one major change here, and that was adding defensive coordinator Brian Flores. That is a great defensive coordinator hire here, and he's done work with the guys he's got. Danielle Hunter having a monster season right now. So the Vikings defense to me is great because the matchup here against the Falcons offense that is just consistently just sputtering all over the place with all that talent, it works for me because they just made a quarterback change. This team's a mess right now. And this is really one of the reasons I made this video is because I've been asked so many times this week about the Falcons defense. Can I play the Falcons defense? Should I play them over the Vikings defense? Should I play them over Pittsburgh's defense? And obviously, Pittsburgh played on Thursday night. This is one of the main reasons I made this video because I want to discuss the Falcons defense. In a pinch, I think you can play them, but just remember this. They do not belong over any of the top 12 defenses that I put in my top 12 defense ranking video this week. The Falcons defense just got ripped to shreds by a quarterback in his rookie season who looks good. Will Levis looks good, but he played his first game and he threw 4 touchdowns on that defense. This defense simply is just not very good. They're a bottom 5 defense in fantasy football this year. Why? Because they're just not good. So I don't really care if Kirk Cousins is out. And of course he's out. It doesn't matter to me because this defense is so bad. So in a pinch, yes, the matchup is very good with a new quarterback in this system. But I would not go out of my way to start them. They're not jumping inside the top 12 simply because of matchup alone. Because last week, the matchup on paper was really good. And look how that turned out. The Bears at the Saints is the next matchup here, and of course, I said the Saints defense is a must-start option this week. The Saints defense was inside of the top 2 this week for me. I love playing the Saints defense this week because not only have they been good in fantasy football this year, but the matchup versus the Bears at home in New Orleans is just in their favor in basically every single category. Obviously, Justin Fields is not a great real-life quarterback, but Tyson Bagent is worse. This team is a disaster. The Bears are an utter disaster. New Orleans is not exactly, they're not exactly some well-put-together team either, but they've got way more talent, and especially on that defensive side of the ball, I expect them to get after Tyson Bagent in a big way. And the Bears defense is not good anyways, and New Orleans has so many playmakers. Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, Michael Thomas, Rashid Shaheed, Taysom Hill. They've got playmakers all over the field. The Bears defense is never a starting option for me in any single week, and especially not this week against the New Orleans Saints. The Rams at Packers is the next matchup, and honestly, both these defenses suck. Neither one of these defenses is good for fantasy football. In fact, the Rams are dead last right now as far as fantasy defense goes. They're abysmal. They're a terrible defense right now in fantasy football. You can't start either of them for sure. In a pinch, I would say you can start the Packers because it looks like Matt Stafford is trending to be out of this game. So just from a matchup perspective with a new quarterback, and as bad as they've been looking, and especially their offensive line, I understand the merit here playing the Packers defense here. If you don't have one of these top options, and I mentioned this in my defense ranking video this week, this is a tough week for defenses in fantasy football. That's another reason why I'm making a second defense video this week, because this week there's lots of competitive matchups on the surface level. That's why I say you could start the Packers defense in a pinch. If you don't have any of the top options I named in my top 12 list, the Packers defense can be played because of matchup and just how bad the Rams are looking so far lately over the past several weeks here. You do not start the Rams defense though. I don't care how bad Jordan Love has been, and he's been horrendous. It's been awful the past several weeks. Their passing game, nothing going. Their running game, nothing going. I'm not telling my audience to play the Rams defense because they're dead last. And they got embarrassed by Kenny Pickett and the Pittsburgh Steelers a couple weeks ago. Jordan Love and the Packers are not much better offensively. This is a no-go situation here for the Rams, basically for the rest of the season. Commanders at Patriots here. Neither of them's a must-start, and really, the good thing about it is that neither of them have a bad matchup. Obviously, the Commanders I had inside my top 12 this week. Now, this is a big one here because I filmed that top 12 defense ranking video before they sent off Chase Young and Montez Sweat before the trade deadline. That changes things for sure. Their defensive line is definitely going to be a new look to their front seven entirely, and I don't like that at all. But the reason they're still in a pinch option, and honestly in the upper tier of in a pinch options, is because the matchup is so excellent. Patriots offense can't score on anybody. Anybody. They can't score points, period, end of story. So their offense is, if not the worst, one of the worst in the entire NFL. So I don't worry about this from a matchup perspective. What I do worry about here is that it seems to be like Washington's honestly waving the white flag a little bit. And I don't like that at all from an NFL team. And from a defensive perspective, giving away two of your top defensive players, that's not a good look for me. So in a pinch, yes, but starting them, no, I would not recommend starting the Washington defense if you've got better options here. And I'm not starting the Patriots defense any week. I don't really care what week it is. The Patriots defense are a bottom 5 defense in fantasy football. They've looked atrocious this year. Two of their best players, Gonzalez, Matt Judon, they're done. So there's really not much upside here from a defensive perspective and from an offensive perspective in New England. New England fantasy options, just stay away from them. Seahawks at Ravens here is the next matchup. I said it earlier in the week. On the defense ranking video, I said Ravens are absolutely inside of the top 10. And it's not because they've got some great matchup. There's a couple reasons for it. Number one, the Ravens defense is elite. Elite. They've got playmakers on every level of that defense. Defensive line, Michael Pierce is an absolute freak getting into everybody's backfield. In their linebacking core, Patrick Queen having a very strong season as well as Roquan Smith. In their secondary, Kyle Hamilton is looking like the player they envisioned him being out of Notre Dame. So Ravens defense has been elite lately. I really like their defense against the Seahawks because Lamar Jackson, the Baltimore Ravens, they've had a lot of success against NFC teams, especially when they come to Baltimore. So I think this being a cross-country trip for Seattle, there's a chance they could come out sluggish here, and that's why I'm playing the Ravens defense this week in a bunch of tough matchups. I got the Ravens here as a must-start. Flex territory in the pinch, you could play the Seahawks defense just because they create a lot of turnovers. That's the real thing about Seattle's defense, is that they're really not that great at stopping you from getting yardage. What they are is a very similar defense to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're fast, they're aggressive, and they create turnovers. The Seahawks can do that. So in a pinch, if you want to shoot for that upside play and maybe hope that Lamar throws a pick or two, or maybe they get a fumble or two, I can understand this one. I could definitely understand this one because Seahawks have been well known for having some turnovers this season. Buccaneers at Texans, next matchup here. You're going to go ahead and start the Texans defense. I said this one earlier in the week. I think the Texans defense are a fine start this week. They're playing the Buccaneers who, offensively speaking, they've been atrocious the past several weeks. Baker Mayfield is looking like a backup quarterback because that's what he is. It's what Baker Mayfield is. He's not a starting quarterback. They've lost 3 straight games. The Baker Mayfield-led Buccaneers, that experience is starting to fail, and the Texans are coming off a humiliating loss, and they're back at home. I think the Texans are going to be a good play this week, and the Buccaneers' offensive line, by the way, is falling apart. So I think that Houston's defense, their pass rush, going to get after Baker Mayfield, and he is not a good quarterback under pressure. Buccaneers defense, I do believe you could play in a pinch just because of how Houston's offense looked last week, but playing the Panthers. So it wasn't a good look because especially they were coming out of a bye week too. And that's the performance they put up offensively after a bye week. Yeah, that wasn't a good look. So I can understand the merit here of playing the Buccaneers defense. I wouldn't say go out and do it just because this team has not looked good as a whole, but I do understand if you do want to play them. Buccaneers defense has gotten turnovers as well this season, so I can see the upside and I can see the merit here. Cardinals at Browns, next matchup. Browns defense, #1 defense for me this week. Absolutely love the matchup. In Cleveland, off a loss that they got really pissed off at because they were right there against the Seahawks. This is a matchup I love here. Arizona's in a tailspin. They just made another quarterback change, not to Kyler Murray, to Clayton Tune. This defense is going to feast this week on Clayton Tune. Myles Garrett, he's going to get after him. And if Clayton Tune throws a pick, it's going to be to Denzel Ward. This Browns defense is excellent this week. I don't need to discuss it much further. Cardinals defense, you sit them because it's not that the Browns have some tremendous offense that you just want to avoid at all costs. It's the fact that the Cardinals are in a tailspin, like I said, and their defense is not one that you want to play in fantasy football any kind of week, especially in a week where I think they're going to get absolutely just abused in fantasy football. Colts at Panthers here. This is such a tough one because I've gone so back and forth on the Colts defense this year. I've looked like a fool several times with the Colts defense this year. I might look like one again, but I'm saying you could start the Colts defense in Carolina, and this is a defense that has not been nearly as good as I thought they would be. Their numbers aren't great. They're averaging about 5 fantasy points per game. That's not good for a fantasy defense. What I like about this one here is that they're actually averaging a decent number of sacks per game, and Carolina's offensive line is bad. So I do think that from a specific matchup perspective, I do think the Colts front 7 could have a decent day against Carolina's offensive line, getting after Bryce Young. That's the main reason they're here. And the second reason is because the Panthers don't score many points offensively. They're not going to get into a shootout like the Colts have been used to this season. So I think just from that matchup perspective, with all the bye weeks from good defenses and with these matchups this week, I have the Colts inside the start territory. Panthers, I'm not starting. Listen, not only is the Panthers defense not that great in fantasy football, but the Colts offense, without Anthony Richardson, has still been super explosive. They're in shootouts basically every week, like 30-plus points. That's because they're very well coached offensively, and they've got a great offensive mind at head coach with Shane Steichen. So I'm not big on playing any defense that's playing the Colts, unless we're talking about maybe the Jets defense, the Cowboys defense, someone of an elite caliber the Panthers are certainly not in that elite caliber. Giants at Raiders here. This is another reason I made this video, because I've gotten a lot of questions about Giants defense, Raiders defense. Can I start one of these defenses this week? I've gotten a lot of questions about these two defenses as well. I'm telling you right now, I'm not starting. I'm not going to look to start either of them. In a pinch, I do think you can start the Giants defense over the Raiders defense personally. Let's get it out there. Neither of these defenses are good in fantasy football. They're both bottom 12 defenses in fantasy football. The only reason that both of them are being considered right now is, number one, the Giants offense is horrendous. They had basically 10 passing yards in week 8. Horrendous. So I can understand people wanting to play the Raiders defense, especially the way the Raiders defense looked on Monday night for a large part of that game. They were holding the Lions to a few points. It was competitive for a while. I'm not doing it because this is a team that just experienced massive changes in their entire department this week. So I don't like the changes. I think they're really dysfunctional right now. I just can't play the Raiders defense. I can't tell my audience to do it. Giants defense, I would play in a pinch simply because, like I said, the Raiders are in a tailspin right now and they're a disaster of a franchise. So I do think from the perspective of just a disaster team, you could play a defense that's playing a disaster team because at least the Giants have a stable coach right now. That's what I'll hang my hat on. But again, I'm not looking to play any of these defenses. I'm not looking for a way to put them in my lineup. But I will say, if you're in a pinch, you don't have a top defense, I can understand wanting to play the Giants defense. Cowboys at Eagles here. This one, I explained it earlier in the week on my top 12 defense rankings video. The Cowboys defense is, in my opinion, a good start. Like, they're not a top 5 start. That's not what they are this week. They're playing the Eagles in Philadelphia. Like, it's not exactly that it's just some fantastic matchup. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that the Cowboys have won 4 out of the last 5 matchups versus Philadelphia, and Philadelphia throws a lot of picks this year. Their turnover differential is awful. It's one of the worst in the league because they give the ball away, and Dallas has one of the best turnover differentials in the league, specifically with getting interceptions. That matchup right there specifically is the one to watch. Dallas's defense is so elite already that, yes, in a tough matchup, I think it actually matches up well, better than people think. So I do think the Cowboys defense can be played. That doesn't go with the Eagles defense, though. The Eagles defense is not a great play because they're not creating that many turnovers, and Dallas doesn't turn the ball over that many times. Aside from the 49ers game, they've been a pretty clean football team as far as turning the ball over goes. So I'm not playing the Eagles defense, but I will play the Cowboys defense. Bills at Bengals, Sunday night game, and again, this one was controversial as well, but I said the Bengals defense, you can start them. Again, it's a matchup-specific thing. The Bills, Josh Allen has thrown a decent amount of picks this year. The Bengals defense, they're averaging basically almost 2 picks per game. Their ball-hawking secondary versus Josh Allen, turnover-prone, and the Bills offense does not look in sync right now. I do think this is a matchup you could take advantage of. I do think there's going to be a lot of points here from both parties. But if you can get this Bengals defense and they get a turnover or 2 on Josh Allen, that's going to end up being a better fantasy week than you think. So that's why they're in start territory. Bills defense is not a start for me. I can't trust the Bills defense right now because, yes, on paper, like, they're a great defense for sure. But the Bengals right now, they're on fire. They're on fire. They're doing exactly what they have done the past 3 years, which is start slow and then get hot and don't look back. The Bengals are in that mode right now. They're way too efficient offensively. I can't trust them enough to tell my audience to play the Bills defense against this version of the Bengals. Last matchup of the week, Chargers at Jets, the Monday night game. Jets defense is a start. Again, matchup isn't great. Defense is. Defense has been tremendous in fantasy football, and it's always against some of the toughest opponents in the NFL that they've still been great against. Jets defense, to me, honestly, they're pretty much startable every single week. Matchups are always varying week to week because a matchup like the Chargers, that offense is actually a pretty tough offense to play because they don't give away the ball too much, but the Jets defense is just so tremendous, and they're at home. They're competitive right now. I can understand wanting to play the Jets defense, and I personally advise you to play them. They were inside my top 10 this week. Chargers defense is a no-go. pretty much every single week for me, even against the Jets offense. I can't tell my audience to play the Chargers defense. They're abysmal. They're so poorly coached. They've got talent on that defense, but they're so poorly coached. So no, I'm not playing the Chargers defense. So let me know what you think of these matchups in the comments below and what questions you need answered before week 9 fantasy football. And if you want to see the top 12 defense rankings in specific so you know what order they're in for week 9, click on this video right here.